It is critical for quality and validation professionals to stay on the pulse of emerging policies and regulations. From the FDA's Computer Software Assurance Draft to the newly released EU Medical Device General Safety and Performance Guidance, evolving regulations are a constant. Our network of professionals cover these topics and more in print, in person, and online, bringing the latest industry news and tools to our audience of hardworking experts just like you. The IVT Network gives you the tools you need to succeed in your profession, providing innovative content, industry research, lifelong learning, and opportunities for networking on a global level. For our listeners, receive 15 months for the price of 12, plus an exclusive discount with your new subscription. Subscribe today with IVT Network, the best decision you'll make all year for your life sciences career.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacy.
Welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. Always striving to bring the latest industry news, networking, and education, we are excited by today's episode. In our effort to give back to the industry and our valued audience, we reveal this timely talk from our spring conference. We invite you to listen in this week to the Digital Transformation panel discussion with insights into organization-wide digital transformation initiatives, firsthand experiences of point solutions and platform transitions, as well as lessons learned in cloud computing and cloud-first approaches to migration. Making up this session are the moderator, Dan Matlis, and esteemed panelists, Sam Cheemokati, Paul Hurlocker, and Ron Schardong. No matter where you are in the digital transformation process, you'll find something of interest here.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. It's great to be speaking with you today. I'm Dan Matlis, and I'm president of Axendia, an analyst firm providing trusted advice on business, technology, and regulatory challenges and opportunities facing the life sciences industry. I'm honored to be joined today by a great panel. Joining us today are Sam Cheemokati, Paul Hurlocker, and Ron Schardong. And we're going to explore their organization's digital transformation initiative. So welcome to you all. And I'd like to start with each of you doing a brief introduction. So Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Hi, everybody. I'm Samuel Cheemokati. Like most delegates at this event, my background is a mix of validation, quality, compliance, and GXP practices of IT systems. But what's probably a niche experience is my role as a change ambassador as I went through 3 separate acquisitions. The first being from Schering-Plough to Merck, and then again from Merck to Bayer, and then from Bayer to Beiersdorf, where I'm currently the GMP responsible owner for the IT production and R&D systems for their OTC drugs division. So that's sort of what we do. Beiersdorf, for those of you who may not know, they're the makers of Nivea, Aquaphor, Eucerin, and Coppertone right now, among other things. Just glad to be on here with my esteemed panelists and also to be speaking to you all.
Excellent. Thank you. And Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. I'm a bit of the odd man out here. My background is primarily in financial services. And I also actually just left Capital One a couple of weeks ago to be the CTO of a company called Spring Oaks Capital. But prior to that, at Capital One, when I joined this panel, I was a VP in the Center for Machine Learning at Capital One, which is a center of excellence focused on building platforms for the enterprise to accelerate the use of machine learning across the company. performing research with university partners, as well as working on a number of modeling use cases across all of the different lines of business. Actually joined Capital One through the acquisition of a company that I started called Notch, which was a consulting company focused on machine learning and data engineering. And we had clients that spanned financial services and healthcare.
Great. Thank you and welcome. Ron, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Thank you, Dan. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So I'm Ron Schardong, and I'm a Senior Director in Technology Quality with Johnson & Johnson. So we'll participate in 3 segments, which is pharmaceutical products, medical devices, and also consumer, which includes cosmetics. My career has revolved around quality engineering, quality systems, regulatory compliance, regulatory affairs, and most recently on computerized system validation, or CSV. And I also have been working with the FDA and industry CSA team for the past 2 to 3 years. I can't pinpoint exactly for how long. Also, we have been piloting some of those principles from CSA internally and also sharing that with industry through speaking engagements such as this one. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Ron. So let's start with some of the questions that we wanted to talk about today. Obviously, COVID-19 has forced life science companies to reimagine the way they operate, right? Traditionally, I've been in life sciences for 30 years, also started my career at Johnson & Johnson. Traditionally, we make very innovative products, but our processes tended to be very conservative. And as a result of that, COVID really challenged a number of organizations and some of our supply chains. So Sam, maybe we can start with you and you can tell us, how has your organization adopted their culture, systems, and processes to drive increased visibility, control, and collaboration across the organization?
Thanks, Dan. And I have how many minutes to do that?
Well, we're talking, you can start with a couple of minutes to get us started and we'll dive in deeper.
Yeah, no worries. I was just saying, because that's a whole lot, and there's a whole lot to cover there. I can't remember. There was a question on poll, must have been on Facebook, and the question was something like this: said, who at your company was responsible for driving digital transformation? The choices were your CEO, your CTO, your CIO, and COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And as you may have all guessed, that's COVID-19 essentially, because Bayersdorf started talking about digital as far back as 2013. But then COVID-19 hit us and boom, Bayersdorf went digital in Europe in 2020. And now we have plans of expanding that into the Americas. So when we talk about digital transformation, I've seen 3 terms being somewhat used interchangeably. And I believe there is some consensus in how those 3 definitions are disparate terms. The first one being digitization, the second being digitalization, and the last one is the one we're most familiar with, which is the digital transformation. And the distinction is somewhat as below. Digitization is taking your information that's analog and converting it into digital, such as electronic records, such as taking your paper records and converting them into electronic records. Digitalization is more of doing things better, faster, cheaper. It's more of an incremental benefits, but you're not necessarily disrupting and transforming. It's the third piece, the digital transformation, that does all of that. And there are 3 things that they try to do, areas, which would be user experience, operational processes, and culture. And if I had to pick one of the 3, it would be the culture that is probably the most challenging.
Absolutely. And actually, Sam, we run that poll, and the corollary to that poll was how many of you are seeing COVID-19 accelerating digital transformation, and 76% of respondents told us that digital transformation is being accelerated by the current trend. So it's definitely something that we're seeing with the industry. So Paul, can you tell us a little bit from your perspective around how at the time Capital One embraced digital transformation and how you went about it? I think it's always good to benchmark and learn from other successes in other industries.
Yeah, so Capital One started a journey, towards its digital transformation in earnest, I would say 6 or 7 years ago, and it came as the company declared that they would be going all in on the cloud. That process drove some significant investments in the underlying data and application architecture. And I'll tell you that, while those changes weren't done to, deal directly with something like COVID, we were one of the first companies that I'm aware of in our industry to make the call to go remote. And we were able to go remote with a significant number of resources, and it was fairly seamless. And I think that the reason for that is because of the move to the cloud. We're completely out of all of our data centers, and just virtualizing a lot of our footprint allowed us to make that shift. So I think those investments ended up being, very important for a number of objectives in driving our overall digital transformation. But it also allowed us to be really agile. The point that Sam made about culture, I think that early on we embraced agile software delivery processes, and I think that as well allowed us to to deal with this in a more flexible way than we would have years prior.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and that aligns very well with what we see from industry. Those companies who had already started their digital transformation in their server rooms. So that's great. So Ron, can you tell us a little bit about Johnson & Johnson's initiatives and how the company is adapting to digital transformation?
Sure. So the cloud is not anything new, right? Mm-hmm. We have been making inroads as a regulated company into using the cloud. But I think to Sam's point about the culture, sometimes things are more, like the transition to new technology or new methods of working might be more gradual. But I think COVID definitely accelerated some of those things because we had to go in that direction. We certainly have seen an acceleration in the use of technology for collaboration, particularly around virtual meetings. And these days we actually have virtual audits, virtual health authority inspections, and also more use of virtual collaboration spaces, not being able to be physically all in one place. And also would have seen the use of virtual tools, such as, I don't know if I can use the name here or not, but like things such as the Google Glass. And I know there are other participants in that market for telepresence. So and that is sometimes used for conducting audits or inspections. So when people cannot be physically in a location, it also using that technology for things such as troubleshooting and preventive maintenance of equipment, where you have someone remotely guiding someone that is physically on site to be able to carry out some of those activities. So I think that these are just some very small examples of how technology was accelerated because of the situation with COVID.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Dan, if I could just add, I think one of the interesting things is that while technology has enabled us to make this transition smoothly, I think that we all understand that there's a degree of fatigue in terms of how we're engaging with each other remotely over video. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do within our team is be very thoughtful about that type of burnout and trying to create some boundaries for our employees. So again, going back to kind of culture and process, there are some important things in terms of how we're working today that I think we're all figuring out as we go.
Yep, absolutely. So the next point I wanted to cover was going a little bit deeper. Whenever we make a change, right, there are challenges and opportunities associated with that. It's always a benefit risk analysis that needs to be done. So Sam, I'll start again with you. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see around digital transformation in life sciences as a whole?
Thank you, Dan. So I look at challenges and opportunities as sort of two sides of the same coin. And I think digital leadership is very important for in times like this, especially where we are in a time of uncertainty. It's extremely important to have that leader who is a visionary and who is able to make a very compelling case and to be honest and transparent about challenge, look at challenge as an opportunity. And that becomes very, very important because everybody, all of you have mentioned how culture has been significant, critical in the success of digital transformation. So it starts, I think, with that leader where they are able to take this idea of the digital transformation and make it a digital transformation, because there's no one secret single formula and say, here's the road blueprint, go make it happen. That ain't there. I sort of like to use this analogy of a Christmas tree. So what is the Christmas tree? And it can mean so many different things depending on what your home is. Most importantly, it's very important your family members are bought into it, and it's going to bring in the festive mood, and everybody rallies around it, and it's the kind of meaning it's providing you. If you're able to bring that kind of a spirit to an organization and stress on skills, stress on leadership, and have a long-term game, and communicate that compelling reason again, that's when the real change happens, because real change happens from the people, not from the business processes, not from the technology. Those are enablers to this business outcome that you envision, and you get the entire organization to rally behind you. That's probably the thing I have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. I actually published an article this morning. Very often as an analyst, we're asked, what's the best technology solution? Fill in the blank 3-letter or 4-letter acronym, MES, CTMS, QMS, CDI. What's the best system? And the answer is there is no best. None of them are best. It's the same thing as if I were to ask you, which one is the best car, a Ferrari Enzo or a Honda Odyssey? It depends on what you're going to use it for, right? What's your intended use? What are your requirements? What's your budget? Right. So it's so important to understand, and I agree with you, Sam. It's about the culture, and it's also not getting hung up on the technology. Technology can enable us to implement and to digitally transform, but it's only a tool. So with that in mind, Paul, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and your experience around the challenges and opportunities of digital transformation in your industry.
Sure. So I totally agree. I think this is a function of leadership and organizational will. I think this type of transformation is so fundamental to the business that's undertaking it. And it's a multi-year commitment, and it everyone's got to be behind it, and you have to really align your organization's objectives behind it. Obviously, the challenges are clear in the data and legacy technologies, but I think that the opportunity is if you can shift to an environment where you have real-time data, where you have flexible infrastructure, and flexible deployment mechanisms for your software, then you're able to serve your customers, internal and external, in ways that I think were unimaginable before. So the transition that Capital One is going through, and that other companies that are embracing this, is truly fundamental, and you kind of end up operating like the FANG companies often do, and the pace at which change is being adapted. Within, in our cases, a clear regulatory and compliance framework. That's such a huge opportunity for all of our businesses.
Yep, great. So, Ron, what is your perspective on the pluses, minuses, or the challenges and opportunities of digital transformation in our industry?
Sure, and I think, again, in a regulated industry, or in the business that we find ourselves in, I think for leadership, usually the biggest challenge when you're talking about opportunities with digital transformation is usually the question is like, how am I going to validate this? Mm-hmm. And how much is it going to cost to do it? And I think for this regulated environment is sometimes that the challenge is that regulators or regulations don't keep pace with the advancements in technology. But I think also there is the human component to that, which is we sometimes have a one size fits all. And so we have a rinse and repeat formula that has worked in the past for things that we have done in the past, but it sometimes is not what we need to move forward. So again, just because we have applied certain methodologies before, it may not work with the innovation. So it does require us to take a step back and apply critical thinking, and perhaps creating new strategies that will deliver a quality product or service, or to allow us to use digital transformation in the life sciences business. But it probably is not going to be done the way we have done things in the past. So it will take some creativity, and it will also take some thinking outside of the box, but trying to keep pace with the technology. So I think that is, for me, is I always see as one of the challenges is trying to move away from things that have worked in the past, but it just doesn't keep pace with the technology of today.
Absolutely. And to build on that, Ron, one of the challenges that we see within the industry, having worked with Cisco Vicente and the team, is around the need to debunk certain myths that industry has around what are the regulatory expectations. The blue black ink discussion. What do I sign with? Well, nowhere in the regulation does it specify color. But there is regulatory inertia in many organizations on what you should do. So to keep talking on that vein, what do you see as some of the regulatory changes that are required in order to be able to have successful digital transformation in our industry?
Sure. I think the answer has multiple parts, right? So it's not just like a yes or no answer. Mm-hmm. I think in some cases, regulators need to give permission, essentially, to adopt new technologies, essentially signaling, saying, hey, we do want you to, being the industry, to innovate and use technology. And I know, at least on the FDA side, there is a lot of signaling of that with some of the FDA's initiatives. And the other part of it is, again, there is a need for perhaps some more global harmonization. It seems like every health authority around the world is issuing separate guidance and regulation around things such as cybersecurity and privacy and software as a medical device and digital health and data integrity. So we get inundated with all of those, but they don't always speak the same language. So for a global business, the case of Johnson & Johnson is, it is hard to operate if you have to have a different set of rules for every market that you're in. And I think maybe another part to the question is industry, particularly folks like myself in quality and compliance. we definitely have to apply critical thinking and also to use technology, like some of the things that we, like regulations that we have today, they have not been revised since 1976. Well, a lot of things have changed since then. So I think we need to use current thinking and things that are available to us today and critical thinking, because, yeah, again, in some cases, you don't need the regulations to change. You essentially, the principles are still there, which is you want to show that you're, at the end of the day, you're delivering a product that meets its intended use. It is of good quality. And in some cases, again, being regulated also meets whatever the regulation calls for. So I think sometimes we just get tangled in our own things that we have created over time. And we need to take a step back and maybe like clear some things out and again, apply critical thinking and then move forward.
Absolutely. And, to build on what you were just saying, we get asked as an analyst firm very often, when is FDA going to come up with regulations on the cloud? And the answer is, why do you need FDA to come up with more regulations? Do you really want that? Be careful what you wish for. Look at the frameworks that already exist, because to your point, Ron, while some of these regulations have been 20, 30 years old, if you look at the guidance on computer system validation, there's a lot of flexibility there. We, unfortunately, when we interpreted and we came up with our procedures, we made them very, very rigid. And now it's time to look and seeing, the transition from CSA to CSV actually aligns very well.
Yeah.
Sam, maybe perhaps you can share a little bit more around what you're seeing in your organization around, quality compliance and what needs to change in order to enable digital transformation.
When we talk about this, Ron just hit right on the nail. So it's all coming down to critical thinking. Application of critical thinking is really key and central to everything, besides these explicitly written, worded regulation that you are alluding to, Dan, that some organizations want to see. Because the expectation is, I think, from the FDA, again, like Ron was saying, two things. Patient safety, it's safe. Product quality. More documentation does not translate into more quality. More testing does. So keep that as your guiding compass. And the second thing, how do I know how much testing is good? What do I need to test? Apply critical thinking. So that's, I think, where we need to focus on. And there was the report that came out last year, the digital business report from MIT, Sloan, and Deloitte, where they said digitally mature organizations do three things well: digital leadership, digital skills for their employees, and lastly, a culture of risk-taking, right? So, and that's where the regulatory comes into play. And that's where people are saying, okay, if I want a culture of risk-taking, how are the regulatory agencies going to foster that without inhibiting it? So on the one hand, the FDA is saying we want to see more adoption of technologies, emerging technologies, because in the end, we want good quality products to be out there for our patients so they can lead a healthy life. But you can't do that by holding them back and burdening them. So that's one. And I'll close with this piece. It's very kind of interesting. Traditional methods are used to a certain kind of solutions in medicine. Now we're seeing software play such a huge piece. Mm-hmm. So now it's a piece of code. It's not necessarily a process or a molecule. Somebody's writing a piece of code that's going to tell you what you're going to be prescribed, how it's going to be released. And that means you cannot hang on to older procedures and methodology. Again, like Ron was saying. So that shift is going to happen, and we're going to see more of that.
And I think to align with what you both were saying, we are seeing the focus on risk, right? The transition to a risk-based approach. And you're seeing the regulators and the standards organizations through ICHQ9 on risk management and on the device side on 14971 actually providing frameworks on how do we manage risk, because we need to take risk, but we need to take risk in a managed way. So Paul, I'll transition over to you and talk a little bit about the technology side of things, right? So what are some of the changes from a technological standpoint that are required or that support digital transformation across industries?
Yeah, good question. I think that there are a number of kind of new architectures that have emerged. We've all talked about the cloud, and I do believe that companies do need to embrace the cloud, the level of abstraction and kind of continued value that's delivered by cloud providers is a game changer. I also think that their new emerging architectures, maybe not so new, but have been with us for at least a few years, like streaming data architectures, where we're capturing more data in real time and driving, having event-driven capabilities that serve customers. I think there's also the notion of like adopting data lakes and being able to build machine learning models off of expansive sets of data that are captured from all over the company. And coupled with all of that is a higher degree of automation when it comes to the production of software and the governance of models and deployment of models. So I think that those are all kind of table stakes things that you really need to achieve at enterprise scale in order to become truly digital.
Yeah, great. And Sam, one of the other things is the fact that traditionally when you had to implement a new solution, it was an IT project, right? IT drove that installation, the implementation, the business was involved. How do we need to change that interaction between the business IT quality in order to enable success?
So all three groups need to convene to come up with a strategy that is essentially a business strategic imperative. And I think we talked about this a little bit, about how technology needs to be adapted to enable this business imperative. That's probably big. And again, Paul alluded to that too. He said leadership is important. You should have a long-term plan. It is going to span over several years. And again, they say digital mature organizations have a digital transformation strategy for at least 5 years or if not longer. So if you're going to bring this in and these organizations are really looking to stay nimble and resilient. No one can predict with certainty what's going to happen next. But what they do know is when that does happen, that they're not caught by surprise. They're able to stay resilient and nimble. So that with that kind of goal, that's how the IT department then knows what would be a supporting technology to help that happen. Yep. There'll be some core technology and some core infrastructure, and Paul's the expert there. He's going to know. But besides that, he's going to sit with the business to see where do you want to go in your area of customer experience, in your areas of operational processes and the culture. How can IT play a role even in setting the cultural mindset? And I think that's possibly the kind of route I would think organizations need to take.
Great, thank you, Sam. So Ron, what do you see from your perspective as some of the technological changes that need to take place to enable digital transformation?
I believe part of it is like alluding to also what Paul mentioned with using data lakes in data warehouses, and obviously using the cloud. In some cases, it's beginning with the end in mind, where, again, especially if you intend to use that data for machine learning or again, any other purpose, definitely having a good strategy around architecture and data architecture, especially these days with like a lot of the wearables and like robotic surgery. There is again a significant amount of data that is going to be moving around, and also so again handling that and having good architecture for the infrastructure as well as for the data. I think that becomes like the big challenge. So kind of like you have to begin with the end in mind. Otherwise, again, you can do a lot of work with data lakes and data warehouses just to find that the data is, again, it's there. It's just not in a way that it's easy to consume to then use it like further. So there is a little bit of that goes on.
And if I may add to that, Dan, that's right. If technology is the engine, data is the fuel. And we're starting to see a mix of both structured data and unstructured data. And then we also have some legacy technologies that are embedded. And that makes this making this a challenge, and it can get very complex and complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, to build on that, one of the transitions that we're seeing is the transition from managing documents, or what I call lobotomized data, static documents, and moving to managing data and turning it into insights and intelligence, right? And as a result of that, we're also seeing a transition from companies from the traditional point solution. So let's talk about a QMS, for example. Some companies have one version for, or one vendor for doc management, and a different one for learning management, and a different one for Kappa, and a different one for adverse event reporting, even though they're all in the same umbrella. And we're seeing that transition to a platform approach, right? To interconnectivity. It doesn't mean you have to have a monolithic solution where everything comes from one vendor necessarily, but what it means is the ability to gain visibility across your entire value network, from molecule or raw material all the way through to patient. And as a result of that, as I said, we're seeing that transition. So Ron, can you maybe share some examples on that transition that you're seeing from point solutions to this more overarching platform approach?
Sure. And I think like when you ask around, and everyone is in favor of harmonization, as long as you harmonize to their own process. So I think the challenge starts with the human element, which is, everybody wants to harmonize, but just harmonize to my thing, so I don't have to do anything else. Let the other people do the work and adjust to my process. So can you imagine, like, for a complex business like ours, with again many constituents like around the world, and across also different segments. So again, we are regulated differently between medical devices, consumer and cosmetics, as well as medicinal products. So again, those are all complexities that are added to the process. So I think with cloud and SaaS, I think it has helped to create some of the conditions to move large number of users from point solutions to platforms. And I think a couple of places where it is happening it is with business applications that are using quality systems, as you mentioned. I think, again, some examples will be around like learning management systems and product lifecycle management. So I think there are like other opportunities, but that's, again, is usually one of the challenges is, again, it's just the larger and more complex the business, the harder it is to do it, because the technology might be there. It is just getting people to align on, this is the direction that we're going. This is the solution that we're picking.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So Paul, can you share some of your experiences on transitioning from point solutions to platforms?
Yeah, Capital One has really embraced from the top down the notion that we need to create platforms to unlock value across all of our lines of business, which is a shift from driving just specifically the needs of local groups or lines of business. And I think part of that is investing in the number of people and projects that you need to really create these enterprise capabilities. It's also culturally embracing product thinking and empowering product leaders across many different domains to collectively drive the vision for internal and external platforms. I think along with that, if you kind of make that shift, then you start to build these reusable capabilities. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're really tying still to business value. I think one of the things that we learned through these transitions, like, for example, there's been a significant effort in consolidating the machine learning platforms and tools that exist across many different areas of Capital One. Capital One has always, like from its founding, been based on like an information-based strategy to be very data-driven. So data science and analytics are nothing new at Capital One, but creating a consolidated environment where we can really leverage the goodness that's created across all the different LOBs is something that's really underway. But I think as part of that, you have to pick use cases that are the highest value, that really deliver on the key objectives of the business while you're creating those platforms. So it's not kind of a field of dreams, build it and they will come scenario.
Yeah, great. Sam, what do you see as some of the key areas that companies should focus on when they're looking at transitioning from point solutions to platforms?
First of all, I want to say it's exciting to listen to Paul. Like I said, he's from the financial background, and I think what he brings to this conversation is exciting stuff.
Thank you.
So the two things I was kind of picking up on listening to both Ron and Paul. Paul talked about how the platforms unlock the value for the business. And Ron talked about, I love that. And he's good with his one-liners. He said, hey, if you're going to harmonize it my way. Right. So point solutions provide a very singular value proposition. So they do this one thing very well. And if it's been in your organization, if huge teams have been using it, and here you are pitching a case for a platform, you're not even pitching a case, you're going to give the users and say, well, this is what you're going to move to. I think it's important to see not just the leadership, to convince the leadership of the business value that you're unlocking by going to a platform, that gets communicated down to the user base, and there's a good communication plan, and you highlight those, especially if you're saying that you're not going to get an instant gratification. You're just going to, in their mind, they're like, why are we fixing something that ain't broken? And then if I move to that, is it going to make my job easier? Maybe it's going to make it easier for one group. Another group may have to undergo a little bit of a relearning to abide. So I think communicating that, highlighting that, showing the end game is critical when you roll this out, not necessarily as an IT initiative of moving from one tech to another, but as how they see this as value for them, even on a day-to-day basis, even though they may not see it in that instant.
Yep. And I think one thing that's important to mention is over the last 40 minutes or so, I lost count of how many times we said that we need leadership in culture change for digital transformation. And it reminds me of a quote by Peter Drucker, who said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," right? The challenge that we have as an industry, in multiple industries across the board, is that change is hard. We don't like change, to Ron's point. Yeah, change it as long as you change it my way. So culture plays such an important role. And while we talked about technology, and I think I agree, Paul, you're bringing a very unique and different perspective. We all can agree that technology is no longer the limiting factor. When I started and we were using token ring, the token didn't go around the ring fast enough. It just was, that was a limitation. Today, technology exists. So let's talk a little bit about some of the cultural changes that are required to have successful digital transformation. Sam, maybe you can start with that, being, since that's part of your role.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I can't remember which report that gave the numbers, and I'm also not very good with the understanding the Gen X, Y, Z, which one's which. But they say that that report said we're at a very interesting point where there's a confluence of all three. Mm-hmm. You have one generation that's just now entering the workforce, and they're used to everything digital. That's not alien to them. They're digital natives, if you will want to call them that. And then you have another generation that is coming of age. They're coming into their element. They're ready to be the decision makers. Mm-hmm. And then you have there's a generation that are currently the decision makers who are going to call the shots. And everybody approaches digital transformation through those lens. And so even when you talk about culture, you cannot use one lens or one filter or one measure and have one common plan to make the culture shift happen. It's different. And there was this other very interesting quote by Kofi Annan, the former secretary of UN, where he said, "You are never too young to lead." And so that would be the workforce that are the digital natives. They may not be too young to lead. And then the same token, he also said, "You're never too old to learn." So there are others there further down that may have to do a learning. Mm-hmm. And the kicker is, it's not only just learning, the challenge also lies in unlearning what you've been doing for ages now. And sometimes that's so ingrained, it's part of your DNA. Now, saying that you need to get into a digital DNA means you're going to unlearn what you've learned over time. And that could be one of the biggest challenges here when you talk about culture changes and how it also spans the different kind of profile you have for all the different talent that comprises your workforce.
Absolutely. So I know I've been monopolizing the questions a little bit, so I'll just remind the audience that if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to type them into the Q&A panel, and we'll answer them as we go along. So with that, Ron, can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing around the need for culture change and mindset change within the industry?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Sam brings a great point, which is in order to learn something new, you might have to forget something. And I think today, and I draw that as an analogy between like moving from Waterfall to Agile. Mm-hmm. And if you have historically done things in a Waterfall mode, trying to move to Agile, and basically trying to do things in this new method, but trying to do the same things that you did on the previous one, it just doesn't work. It's almost like you have to forget it, like what Waterfall is, before you can do Agile. And actually, just like a little anecdotal thing is, I actually visited a development center a couple of years back, and I was talking to one of the developers, and in the conversation, like Waterfall came into the conversation, and he said, "What is Waterfall?" Because he had essentially all that he has done was Agile. So no previous knowledge of that, which is great. There was no baggage there. So I think from a culture standpoint, to kind of drive the transformation, we definitely need to move to more of an Agile mindset type culture. It's really focusing on, again, minimum viable products and iterations versus more of the traditional waterfall where you get everything in and at the end everything has to be perfect. You cannot make changes along the way because you have scope creep. And so it's one of those things where in order to move to an agile mindset, you have to develop a certain level of comfort with good enough.
Yep.
If you're aiming for perfect, like life is going to be miserable. So it's as the saying goes, if we're going to fail, let's fail fast, learn from it, and then move forward. We also talk a lot about like a risk-based, right? Everything is risk-based, but by definition, that means that there has to be an appetite for a certain amount of risk, that it's not going to be risk-free. And so those are, again, some of the things that we need to change is like being comfortable with, again, sometimes things not being perfect and accepting a certain amount of risk in order to try out some of these, again, these technologies and things that we have available to us so that we can move forward. Otherwise, we're pretty much working ourselves out of a job and into obsolescence.
And to build on what you just mentioned, Ron, I've had the opportunity to work with many companies who at the onset say we use risk-based approaches and we're a risk-based company. And then you go to the risk assessment and every single requirement is high risk. Every single item is high risk. So yes, you're risk-based, but what's the point? The other thing you remind me, the other anecdote is I had an opportunity to talk to Al Taylor and John Murray at FDA, who were the original authors of the guidance on computer system validation that's now 21 years old, back in, written in 1999. And I asked them, why did you put that waterfall model in that education and the guidance and so on? And actually what Al said is that the reason I put waterfall is because from a didactic standpoint, it's easy to explain. If you look at the guidance itself, it talks about use any model you want. It talks about, but at the time we called the spiral model, which is the early days of Agile. But as an industry, since we heard the regulators talk about we're going to use waterfall, that became gospel. And we all accepted it as the only way rather than one proposed approach. Yeah. So with that in mind, Paul, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about, culture change and what are the kinds of things that we need to embrace as part of that culture in order to be successful?
Sure. I mean, in any heavily regulated industry, there are systems and processes and organizational hierarchies in place to, protect our organizations, and they're there for good reason. As you're shifting to this notion of a digital transformation, you need to embrace product thinking and agile and all the things that we've been talking about, but that almost causes a decentralization of decision making. I think the way that you solve that is not by taking on more risk all the time, but it's about taking those existing processes and systems and organizational hierarchies and pushing them down into and making it a part of the transformation itself. Through automation, how can you build those tenants more closely into your environments and start to push more decision making to the edges and into systems themselves? Of course, human beings will always be involved in making decisions around risk and regulatory compliance. But I think there are ways in which to drive more automation and visibility into those processes, and that's got to be a key part of it. And that's a big cultural change. The command and control mentality can sometimes run contrary to the types of things that we're talking about here with Agile and product-based thinking.
Great. Thank you. So we'll actually open it up to our audience for Q&A. So once again, if you have a question you'd like to ask one of the panelists, please type it in. And I'll start with one of the questions that we have. And Ron, maybe we'll start with you, given your role and given that we're in a highly regulated environment. Often there's a fear of doing something that is not quote unquote sanctioned by the regulators and upsetting them and getting a 43 or a write-up the next time they come in because we didn't exactly follow what we heard last time. So can you share a little bit about how do you go about making these changes and adopting technological transformation in our highly regulated environment?
Sure. Will be my pleasure. I think there is these days quite a bit of a regulatory inertia. So we do things sometimes not because it makes sense or because it is the right thing to do. Is many times we say, well, I'm doing this because of the auditor. I'm doing this because of the regulator. But if you really strip out some of these perceptions and sometimes you need to go back to what exactly does the regulation say? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the regulation, similar to laws, is very generic in nature. It says, well, you need to do this thing. How you do it is entirely up to you. So I think there is an opportunity for taking a step back from what we perceive as being sometimes we have been doing it for so long that we sometimes forget what the regulation or the standard actually says. And Yep. We're just going by memory that this is how we have done things for the last 10 years or longer. So you need to overcome a little bit of that inertia. But I think the other thing is you can try different approaches, right? We talked a little bit earlier about using a risk-based approach. And I think with that comes the understanding that with a risk-based approach, it does not imply absence of risk. It just means you apply critical thinking. You look at, again, what is the impact, particularly on the GXP side of applications. What is the impact that it has on patient safety or product quality, or in some cases, again, depending what it is, there might be some regulatory requirements for that application or what the application is doing. So you take that into account, but I think some people feel more comfortable with the risk, and so they go straight into the deep end of the pool, and they will jump in. For others, there is less comfort with with that level of risk. So start in the shallow end of the pool, right? Do a little bit and gain some confidence, some comfort, and then do a little bit more and kind of you stretch yourself, but over time. Yep. So I think there is, again, a lot of room for interpretation. I think it is important that you put out essentially create what your strategy is going to be around, again, your interpretation of some of these things, and just go and do it. Start small, and then basically take more chances as you move along, as you gain comfort with what you have created. And a lot of that is again, as you will see when the CSA guidance gets published in the US, but there is already a reference to that in ISP and GAMP, and I think there is an opportunity to basically get yourself out of the mode of how you have operated in more recent times and just apply some of that critical thinking.
Yep, absolutely. Sam, we have another question that really aligns with your area. So in your opinion, what is the best way to foster interdepartmental collaboration so that we can see positive change?
I've seen companies take this route, and including Bearstorf. I think the first time I heard about this term was the term called digital accelerators. Mm-hmm. So what that meant was you took members, a cross-functional team that comprised members from various departments, and the function they served was they would take up very small iterative experiments before they are rolled out as enterprise-wide initiatives. End of the day, digital transformation isn't one big bang innovation effort and undertaking. It's really a series of these little iterative experiments with the strategy and the big goal in mind, and working towards the enterprise-wide initiatives. So I think that is sort of how you may want to look at it. Even with Buyerstock, there's this idea of rolling out something similar. I think they're calling it a digital ninja. We're still working on what that means. But essentially, I think what it means is, as opposed to a full-on sending out an army, and a ninja takes on this very focused, specific mission, and the ninja has a very specific acumen and expertise that they apply on this. And once that's done, it unlocks avenues to scale that up and make it more enterprise-wide, and then you bring in the army. So that's something that I've seen.
Absolutely great. So we're running out of time. I really want to thank Sam, Paul, and Ron for sharing their great insights and experiences around digital transformation. I know I learned a lot. I hope our audience found it valuable as well. And with that, I want to wish you a great rest of your day and stay safe. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And a special thanks to our panelists.
Thank you once again to our moderator, Dan Matlis, and the panelists, Sam Cheemokati, Paul Hurlocker, and Ron Schardong, for sharing their expertise. Also, a big shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen, for all of his time in editing these sessions. Lastly, thank you to you, our valued listeners. We want to hear your thoughts and questions on this topic. Also, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe in your podcast player of choice so you never miss an episode. Tune in next week to continue the learning when we invite Steve Thompson to be our guest, providing some reactionary comment and context to the sessions you just heard. You can find out more by visiting ivtnetwork.com or by emailing customer service at ivtnetwork.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week here on Voices in Validation.